Welcome to The Agenda. I'm your host, Kerwin Gaines. This week, Senator Tizzy Lockman. She's going to review 3 great bills that are currently on the governor's desk for signature, along with education initiatives. Senator Lockman.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate it. We know that you have a tremendous amount of information going on right now. So much in your head, so much to talk about.
Yes.
You are advancing the agenda in Dover, and we'd like to thank you for that. But a lot of the information, I don't think that the public knows.
Sure.
Right? There's a lot of questions, there's a lot of concerns, and we need to know. Okay. So let's start off with Senate Bill 149.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Law Enforcement Bill of Rights.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us more about it.
Okay. And I'll preface this by saying, thank you again for the kind words about advancing the agenda. And of course, everything in Dover and in all of these spaces is collective. It's teamwork. So I'm certainly not alone in advancing these policies. But so I did introduce a bill last Tuesday, in fact, which was the 1-year anniversary of the killing of George Floyd, which set off a really
no coincidence.
No coincidence. Set off a really visceral conversation, throughout the country and the world, quite frankly. And so, but what this particular bill is focused on is something called the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, which is a piece of the Delaware State Code, so the law of our state, which provides, a lot of privacy, some would say secrecy, when it comes to disciplinary records for members of law enforcement, and that's something that's been in place for a number of decades. And in fact, the state of Delaware has one of the most sort of locked down, bills of rights in that sense. And so what this bill does...
So sorry to stop you. So when you're telling us it's locked down, do you mean the police departments in the past, the 40-some that we have in this small state, they're very protective of information?
Sure. Well, the state law protects information about disciplinary proceedings and any, complaints and results of complaints and those types of things. There's only very particular ways that information can be accessed, and it's really primarily through a civil court proceeding. If there's a case that an individual would have against someone, in those cases, those records can be accessed. So, last year, when the Black Caucus first put together what we call our Justice for All agenda, we were looking at ways that we could amend LEABOR, and one of which is the shorthand that we use, or some of it's pronounced differently. I say LEABOR, and so we were looking at providing greater access to defense counsel to those records. So if you had a situation where someone was on trial and there was potentially a member of law enforcement testifying, the defense counsel would be able to identify whether or not there were credibility questions or other reasons that might be relevant to that case.
So now, is that the case? Does that occur now?
That does not occur. Those
so
records,
I could have a litigation against a law enforcement officer, and that law enforcement officer is testifying against me or for me or however,
right?
And I don't know anything about their past, and that can't be brought into court.
Right. It would be a case where a law enforcement officer may be testifying in a criminal proceeding against an individual civilian. In a civil case against a member of law enforcement, there is access. That's really the only sort of path into those records at this point. So the current bill, Senate Bill 149, opens that up for defense counsel, and also does what I think has been really part of the national conversation, but calls for the opening of records to the public as well. So that means that media would be able to access those records and identify anything that the public might need to know, and the public by request. Essentially we'd expect there to be a certain type of an interface set up so that the public could request records, that would be available. And the bill talks about, making sure that private information of law enforcement is not made available. We're not trying to create a situation where people can go, we don't want to encourage harassment or anything like that in any direction. This is really about
Transparency,
accountability, building bridges between law enforcement and the communities that they serve, which by and large, I think we see a lot. We've seen a lot of positive things in law enforcement as well, but we also are aware that there can be patterns of abuse potentially, and there's the saying that you hear a lot. No one hates bad cops more than good cops, and so we want to have an opportunity to strengthen that, to sort of to have that transparency and shine a light that would allow us to identify problematic behaviors and ensure that those aren't occurring in such a sacred position in society as law enforcement. And then the other thing that the bill does is it clears a way so that we can have civilian review boards.
Mm-hmm. Now that's a big topic, right?
That is a major topic,
right.
And I feel like I'm really just getting the sense of the depth of that conversation.
Now, have you received any opposition?
In
regards to civilian review boards? I mean,
right.
the blue code of silence is real, the blue wall is real, and you're poking holes in this wall.
Right.
So what opposition have you encountered?
Well, to start with, I'd say I'm coming from a place of I represent a portion of the city of Wilmington, and so from my perspective, we've seen civilian review boards, the seeds of that already being put in place for Wilmington Police Department with support of the administration and so on and so forth. And really, I just saw it as my obligation representing this area to help make sure that we enabled it to be as effective as possible. And so that's really what my interest in working on that piece was about. There's been a lot of pushback on civilian review boards. I think, we've talked to police chiefs around the state. I think there's concern about probably taking away from the internal processes that law enforcement already pursue, or, again, just what are the qualifications of folks to sit on a body like that. And I'm still learning more about some of those concerns. So, we made sure that in this current bill, we are not eliminating any internal processes that currently exist. It's a different layer of accountability, another layer that adds that community root to the process of holding law enforcement accountable potentially. But those bodies would ultimately be formed, on the municipal level, on local government level. Any local government agency that has a police agency would be empowered to form a civilian review board, really on their own terms. And this bill doesn't prescribe what that has to look like or how that has to go. It's just making sure that they're not going to be inhibited from accessing records, which is really important
for a tax service that citizens provide.
Exactly.
Exactly. I also think it'll cause accountability for police officers that may have been there for too long, or been allowed to continue to police.
Yeah.
And now they won't.
Yeah, quite simply, what resonates with me is I've heard loud and clear from people that I represent that they want to have a strengthened relationship. They don't want to do away with policing. They want to have safe communities.
No, they are very necessary.
Yes, and law enforcement is a part of that. And the concern is the trust, and the way trust is broken down, and wanting to have tools and information that would support rebuilding that trust. And so, I've heard that. I definitely agree, very strongly with that goal, and see it as my obligation as legislator.
As the majority whip now.
Yes, yes, I've taken on a new role this session. We're in the 151st session of the General Assembly, and I was elected by my peers in the Delaware Senate Democratic caucus to serve as the whip for our caucus, which is the majority caucus. So that's been pretty cool. I'm getting a taste of leadership within my chamber. So that's been really
How's
nice.
it going?
It's every day is a new adventure. There's just always a lot of moving parts in policy making, because we've got 62 legislators between the two chambers. We have got a variety of excellent staff and different folks who we work with through the process, our constituents, advocates, lobbyists. So there's always just a lot of personalities and a lot of priorities and initiatives that are going on in Dover. And so, my role in leadership is just to kind of make sure that our team, which is the Delaware State Senate Democratic Caucus, is being able to advance their agendas, and that we're all, doing our best to stay on the same page and get work done for our constituents. That looks different we have a really diverse caucus in the Senate, which is really exciting and fun. Diverse in pretty much any way you could think about. We have a range of political positions as Democrats. We have from different types of communities and increasingly racially diverse and just any dimension you could think of. So I think it's really been a very rich and rewarding year as a team, just sort of finding our way through what policies are we going to be able to advance, and it's been great.
One of those policies is Senate Bill 3.
It is.
Tell us a little bit about
Another
that.
heavy lift.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm in my second half of my term, and it's the first term I've ever served as an elected. And I watched and listened a lot in my first couple of years, and then paid close attention to the data I was seeing and what I'm hearing, of course, from constituents and neighbors, and decided to go for a couple of these heavy lifts. So Senate Bill 3 is one of them. That is also known as permit to purchase. It is a gun safety policy. And what that is focused on is creating a permitting system for the purchase of handguns in the state of Delaware. So it creates sort of a card, not necessarily a physical card, but it creates a card system whereby, when someone wants to purchase a handgun, they would have to have this sort of designation. They'd have to be permitted for purchases that they make. And
so sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
So how does that coincide with the concealed weapons permit that already exists?
Excellent question. So essentially, there's some different requirements to be able to have a permit to do the purchasing of handguns. Training is a component of that. You have to have proof that you've had this certain level of training within your last 5 years, because we know if someone's a concealed carry permit holder that they've gone through that extensive training in order to be a concealed carry holder, they would be exempt. You don't have to go and do things all over again. So that's one significant way. So you have to have a certain level of training that you can prove that you've partaken in, and then you would, essentially go to the Department of Safety and Homeland Security and obtain this identification permit and be fingerprinted on a semi-regular basis. So there are some fees associated with getting trained, of course, with getting fingerprinted. In some states, you see a fee attached to the permit itself. And in the process of working on this bill, and I've worked for many months on getting it to where it is now, we understand concerns about equity and access. And the bill is about creating greater safety, in the handgun space. It's not about preventing people from being able to participate in purchasing.
I'm sure some of the opposition that you've encountered, because gun safety, guns itself is a very partisan issue.
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways it transcends party.
Right.
People feel very, very strongly on this issue about anything they perceive as an inhibition to this. But it was really important to us that we make sure we keep the costs, manageable. I totally understand that concern. People are concerned, I think sometimes too, about the time that it might take. So the bill comes with a big fiscal note to provide the Department of Safety and Homeland Security the capacity to process these, in an effective way. So, I understand concerns about change, and I certainly understand there are some who want to see nothing change when it comes to firearms. But, as a Wilmingtonian, violence is a problem. Gun violence is a problem. I know we'll talk about other ways that we can address that through other types of programming and helping people to be healthier and have hope in life so they're not engaging those behaviors. But the availability of firearms, handguns in particular, and illegal handguns in particular is a big part of the type of violence that we see in the streets of Wilmington. And one of the first things I committed to when I decided to run for this office was to do whatever I could in my lane as a state legislator to help address that and to reduce that violence. And the research that I've seen on permit to purchase and the potential to impact the type of illegal gun trafficking and violent injuries and deaths as a result of that is really
I'm sorry to cut you
compelling.
off again.
Yeah.
So
no, you're good.
is that the opposition that you're getting from folks? Is that the crimes, the terrible atrocities that are going on in regards to gun violence are non-registered owners, basically? And it seems as though we're penalizing registered owners in obtaining a gun when the culprits or the people that are having all these issues with guns are not registered owners.
Sure. I mean, I've definitely heard that, and I think there's truth in the sense that a lot of the bad actors do not have those handguns legally, and I understand people having concerns about having a policy that impacts them in order to get at that problem.
Right. Does that fix that problem?
It absolutely does. I mean, I think the research is compelling. It's not, there's no one thing that's going to fix a problem 100%. This is something you have to learn to accept in policymaking sometimes. And so I'm not saying we're going to have a permit policy, flip a switch, and there'll be no more tragedy in the streets of Wilmington. But we have states that are seeing 20%, 30%, upwards of that reductions in violent gun deaths. And, this is not a big city.
8 square miles, right? Something
right?
like that.
Something like that. And when we see the names of folks who are involved in these incidents, we know them. We know their families. And to me, a 20% reduction that we could get at with a policy that causes, some level of inconvenience to the good actors, but saves real lives. I think these are the compromises that policymaking ultimately is all about. And so, I'm happy to take the criticism for those who feel like it's unfair for them to have to, see any disruption in the process that they're accustomed to. I understand their frustration. I also think doing things that are going to lead to reducing this culture of violence that is really affecting so many. And I think that's true on the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights bill. I think it's true on this bill. To me, it's about just abhorring violence in any form and from any source. And that I feel that I have to do whatever I can as a legislator to help to turn those things around. And so I've been very thoughtful about the policies that I've picked, even when they're tough ones. I think they're worth hashing out for the lives that they'll save and the improvements that we'll see in our communities. So I'm excited to put myself on the front line of those bills and take whatever criticisms or frustrations people have. That's my job, to listen and hear that and do my best to respond, without sacrificing the outcomes that we're seeking for folks, the people of Delaware.
So now thank you for that, but now you're head of the budget committee.
No, not the head.
Not
I'm
the head.
on it. Oh,
you're
my goodness.
on the budget committee.
Ooh, I would truly be, yes, just laid out right now if I was. But so no, I'm a new member of the budget committee. And that's another kind of a heavy lift, I guess. One of the things when people ask you, what does a state legislator do? One of the biggest ways to show them the importance of our job is we get to decide what our budget as a state is. What are we going to spend money on? Which is, there's no better way to understand what our priorities are. So was very excited to have the opportunity to serve as a member of the Joint Finance Committee. So we get to hear from all of the agencies in the state about what their budgets are, what their budget priorities are, things that they want to add or take away. And then the actual heads of the budget committee, one of my colleagues, Senator Trey Pardee, and in the House, Representative Bill Carson, work with our Office of Management and Budget and our Controller General to craft a budget with our input. And last week, in like record time, we did what we call markup. So that's when we go through a draft of the budget. It's a combination of things that the governor has suggested and things that we as legislators have brought to the table, and in order to decide what is Delaware going to spend our funds on.
How do we look?
We're looking pretty good,
looking good?
Actually. I'm really excited. We're sort of trying to set aside some of the federal resources that we know are coming in the future. But I have to give our governor a lot of credit. He's got a really good fiscal mind, and he's done some things during his time as our governor. He calls it budget smoothing. So it's a way of not overspending in the years where we have a big surplus, so that when things inevitably go through their sort of boom and bust cycles,
so to speak, that
we can maintain the budget and the expenditures that we've decided that we want to be focused on. And it seems to be, like bearing fruit. We really weathered the pandemic extraordinarily well, and we'll be in a position to, I think, even put money away to be prepared for the next down year. So it was pretty cool to be part of. There was a lot of surplus funds, and I think we had to have the discipline to know that you can't spend just like we have to do in our own households. You can't spend it all, but it really gave us an opportunity to make some investments in Delawareans that we really wanted to. And I'm part of a budget committee right now where I think a lot of us are really excited about things like education and supporting our direct service professionals, who work with some of our neediest Delawareans. So I think we did some good things. I mean, you can never do everything you want to do, but it's been a great learning experience. I can't imagine a better way to learn about the operations of our state in this role.
So a big budget item is education.
Yes.
And you have Senate Bill 56 that's out right now dealing directly with education.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So I am part of the team that advanced Senate Bill 56. So I actually was able to work on that as a lead sponsor with all of the chairs and vice chairs of the education committees. So Senate Education, of which I'm vice chair, and House Education. So that's Representative Kim Williams chairs it in the House, Representative Nnamdi Chukwucha is vice chair in the House, and Senator Laura Sturgeon is my chair of the Senate Education Committee. And so we all came together on this bill, which does, we'll say it codifies opportunity funding. So what it does is it takes a program that Governor Carney put in place a number of years ago called opportunity funding, which adds a layer of additional funding that goes to our school districts for students who are English language learners or students who come from low-income backgrounds. And it gives districts an opportunity to decide how do they want to spend those funds to make sure that those students are getting the resources they need to be successful. So it's about equity. It's about leveling the playing field and making sure that we're doing right by all students in the public schools. And so that was just something that we were putting in the budget year over year, and it wasn't permanent. And so what this bill does is it makes that model permanent. So it's sort of a flexible funding
that's good.
Set of funds that will flow to the districts. It's actually the result of a lawsuit, or the codification of the bill of the opportunity funding is the result. So there was a lawsuit from the NAACP, Community Legal Aid Society, the ACLU, and a group called DO, Delawareans for Educational Opportunities, which, full disclosure, I've had some involvement with those organizations, and they put forth a lawsuit against the state a number of years ago saying that the way funds flow to our schools is not fair, particularly when it comes to low-income students, Black and brown students who speak English as a second language, that kind of thing. And so there was a settlement as a result of that lawsuit.
Oh, okay.
It was sort of split into two pieces. One was focused on property reassessment, and one was focused on the way we actually, just distribute funds.
So the property reassessment, did that have anything to do with redlining?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think redlining has reverberations throughout all of our policies. So like the remnants are there in the sense that because local taxation is a part of how we fund our schools, the results of redlining, the fact that people have been put into low-income communities, locked into them, and then the schools their students are assigned to are attached to that, you're going to see less funds flow. Now, we do in this state, and we could do hours on this because it's complicated and I'm still learning a lot about it, but we have some formulas and mechanisms in place to create equalization across school districts to try to address the fact that you have all of that inequality from one district to another because of the local taxes. But the fact that we haven't reassessed properties in decades has actually frozen those formulas at this point so that they were no longer able to effectively create that equalization.
And that's a big concern that we have here at the agenda to ensure that that's happening.
Exactly. So I learned over time as an education activist and advocate that the property reassessment was a key piece to unlocking the equity that we were ultimately seeking. It seems like it's really deep in there. It's really technical, not something that is the first thing people think of to address in education. But I think the fact that we're now seeing those wheels turn again is going to make a big difference in terms of seeing more equitable allocation of funds. But we still have to deal with, the state sort of funding formula and the way that is currently arranged and whether or not we want to adjust that. Opportunity funding kind of lays on top of our current funding system and gives us a sense of what having flexible funding might do, where we can, as opposed to what we have as our base, which is called the unit count. And that is, it's a little bit more rigid, or a lot, depending on who you ask. And, there's folks who would like to reform it. There's folks who would not like to reform it. So that's an ongoing conversation.
Right. So before we go to that one,
yes.
let me ask you briefly, the Reading Consortium.
Yes.
Dealing with equity. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I think when I first got to Dover in 2019, I think when you're a young freshman legislator, you're like, what is the big thing that I want to work on? Education has driven me for a long time. Started out as a PTA mom when my daughter was in elementary school. She's a senior, graduating tomorrow. So I was like, I'm a Wilmington parent. Thank you. I'm a Wilmington parent, and I want to see our schools thrive. What kind of policies can we put in place to turn things around for where we generally are seeing our Wilmington students not thriving in public schools to the degree that we would like to. And I was talking to my friend, Representative Nnamdi Chukwucha, who was also a new freshman at the time, and turns out we had a very similar concern. We were concerned about some of the ongoing impacts of the Neighborhood Schools Act, which was 20 years ago, and complicated stuff we could definitely talk more about in terms of where are students assigned to go to school, what does that mean for the resources that they have access to in those schools, and those kinds of things. So we had between us a lot of ideas and things that we wanted to do, and we got it into our mind after some conversations with colleagues, that we should put together a body to address this. Now, there was precedent for this. I was vice chair of the Wilmington Education Improvement Commission when Tony Allen was chair for several years, had some really good stuff going on.
Who's now the president of Del State.
Now the president of Del State. Good guy to know for sure. And great guy to work with in that context. And so we did a lot of really forceful stuff. We talked about governance and should we be redrawing district lines? Let's talk about funding. Let's talk about how do we offer the right wraparound services for our students, things like that. So we wanted to continue that conversation from where the commission had been. It had kind of run its course and sort of hit a wall. So Representative Chukwucha and I decided we were going to reauthorize that body, give it a new name, the Reading Consortium for Educational Equity, named after Louis Reading, the lawyer who did many things, including the Brown versus Board of Education.
We had a great conversation about that earlier.
Did you?
We did in our first episode. We look forward to having you on again to talk about it even more. And I mean, you have so much information to give us, which is a great thing, and you're ensuring the Delawareans are on the agenda.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's complicated, but it's simple. When I ran for office, I knew we wanted to have safe communities, we wanted to have economic opportunities, and we wanted to have great schools, which is kind of tied in there. And so everything that I choose to lead on, whether it's a heavy lift or a light one, I try to make sure that it's connecting back to the things that I said were my priorities when people elected me to this position. And so I feel very strongly that the things that we've talked about today are, we want to make sure that folks are educated, prepared to engage in a strong economy. We want to make sure that they're safe in their own communities from anyone, whether it's from fellow community members or from those who are there to protect them. And so I think it's really good stuff that we can do to move the needle for Delawareans in general, but certainly for the people in the 3rd District who I represent.
Well, we look forward to having you on again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having
Senator
me.
Lockman here on the agenda. Thank you very much.